Thank you so much, Sonia and Jeannie and Iris. And if you didn't know, Iris has been fighting valiantly against Parkinson's and has every reason to have an excuse to say that she can't be here. I've got a whole lot going on up here. There we go. But Iris, sincerely, thank you so much for your heart that is so clearly transparent through you as you sing. A couple of weeks ago, Caroline and I celebrated our 19th wedding anniversary. So 2004 was an eventful year for us because everything related to our marriage, all that started that year. And so we actually met for the first time in February. We were engaged in April, and then we got married in October. So everything, and no pregnancy was involved. So let me just be very clear about that. Anyway, everything happened very quickly, though, and I was 29 when we met, though, and especially if you meet somebody at that stage, you know a little bit more than you did at 19 or at 18, and you kind of know what it is that you're looking for, and you very quickly kind of deciding or making assessments, hey, I'm really serious about this or really not, and so very quickly we decided we were very interested in each other, and I'm telling you, though, that I wouldn't trade anything for the 19 years of marriage, but the truth is that dating time is a ton of fun, isn't it? When you think back to those early dates and how exciting everything was, I mean, it's almost intoxicating. It really is. And you think about, and I can remember what it was like, and I'm wondering, how in the world did I get anything done? Because all I could think about was how much of a blessing I was to her. And no, but all I could do was to think about her and the next time that you would talk and the next time that you would go out or the next opportunity you'd have to be together. And so you're experiencing all these feelings and you're having all these butterflies and all this excitement. But then there's also, because God has wired us this as well, you want to lay hold of each other as well. You know what I'm talking about. But at least to demonstrate how it is that you feel physically, even in the smallest of ways. And so I remember vividly what it was like the first time that I held Caroline's hand. It was on a Saturday, and we had been walking. We'd gone to, that's how in love I was walking. But we've gone to this trail, McAlpine Greenway, and we're just walking. It was beautiful. I even remember sincerely what I had on that day. But I just remember thinking, I want to hold her hand while we're walking. But I'm nervous. I think that she likes me. I know that I really like her. But you don't want to try to grab somebody's hand and then they... You don't want that to happen. And you want to be cool about it, right? Act like this is not a big deal. Anyway, so we're walking, and I'm telling you that I am so nervous. I really am, and because what I've got to do, my mind is kind of split track, because I've got to think about what I'm saying, because I want to just be cool and droll about this. So I want to be remaining in conversation, but I'm thinking I'd like to hold her, so like my hand is like dripping in sweat, and so I'm thinking. Anyway, so finally, I think we might have maybe even made the turn to head back back to where we started. And so I thought, all right, now, Michael, this is the time. And so I just grabbed her hand, and again, you got to play it cool. So you don't have to act like, just nothing has happened. I'm just so cool with this, and again, hands dripping wet, and. But that was a memorable moment. It really was. And I was so nervous to make that first move. Now, the next time I was a little nervous, but far less so. The third time, a lot less. It's that first move, many times, that is the most difficult. That's not simply true, and it's not merely the case as it relates to human interpersonal relationships, but it also has a lot to do with our experience in following the Lord. As it is that He gives us a task, He provides a door of opportunity, He presents something that He wants us to be about, and that if we can just make that first move, if we can make that first step, we know that the other ones will come easier, but that first one's tough. That first one's tough. And so we're left with this thought, is there anything that might help me as I'm seeking to take that first step of obedience in following the Lord? That's what we want to think about today and answer that question as part of our study looking at the life of Gideon. What is it that would help me to know as I take my first step in following God? He tasks me, He's given me an opportunity, He's laid some burden on my heart. I know that, and I know I need to take this first step. Is there something that would help me as I'm taking that first step? Look with me in your Bibles today to Judges chapter 6. Judges chapter 6, we're going to start reading with verse 33. Judges 6, verse 33, we're told, all the Midianites, the Amalekites, the Kedemites gathered together, crossed over the Jordan, and camped in the valley of Jezreel. The Spirit of the Lord enveloped Gideon, and he blew the ram's horn, and the Abiezrites rallied behind him. He sent messengers throughout all of Manasseh who rallied behind him. He also sent messengers throughout Asher and Zebulun and Naphtali who also came to meet him. Then Gideon said to God, if you will deliver Israel by my hand, as you said, I will put a wool fleece here on the threshing floor. If dew is only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, I will know that you will deliver Israel by my strength, as you said. And that's what happened. When he got up early in the morning, he squeezed the fleece and wrung the dew out of it, filling a bowl with water. Gideon then said to God, don't be angry with me. Let me speak one more time. Please allow me to make one more test with the fleece. Let it remain dry and the dew be all over the ground. That night, God did as Gideon requested, only the fleece was dry and dew was all over the ground. Gideon is finally taking the first steps in doing what God has tasked him with. And as we read his story, it helps answer the question for me and for you, is there anything that might help me as I am weighing my first steps? And I think based on what we see in this passage, there are some things, and the first is this: your obedience matters more than your feelings. Your obedience matters more than your feelings. All right, so let's get back in our minds what's going on with Gideon. He's part of the people of God, and the Israelites, they have been wandering in terms of their relationship to the Lord, in terms of their spiritual commitment. They've been acting like, candidly, lost people for a long time. And they've been picking up the practices of all their pagan neighbors, and this gets the attention of God, and He winds up seeking to intentionally bring negative circumstances in their life to draw them back to Him. And the way that God used negative circumstances specifically was to lead the Midianites to come in, and for a period of 7 years, they serve as tormentors of the Israelites. And every period of months, they come in like marauding bandits, and anything that is good or praiseworthy or valuable, they take it. Whether it's material thing, it's food, it's animal, whatever, they take it. It's been going on for 7 years, and the Israelites are devastated. They are weak as a people. They are decimated economically, and they've called out to God. God finally has the attention of His people, and He decides He's going to come to their aid, and He's going to use a young guy named Gideon, who's from an inconsequential small family, who's from an inconsequential tribe, and He's going to use him, who has no leadership experience in the past. He's going to use him to get the Midianites in the rearview mirror of the experience of the Israelites. We have seen how this process has unfolded. And last week we saw that before Gideon does anything, God wanted to make sure that he was clean. And there was some stuff in his life that he needed to get out. There was some stuff in his family's life that needed to get out. And we saw how the first people that God used Gideon to make a difference in was not the nation, but in his own family, in his own household. And so with all that being said, we get to verse 33, and we are hearing about the Midianites, and they're joined by some of their buddies. The Amalekites, the Kedemites, they've crossed over the Jordan, and they're encamped at the valley of Jezreel. So they are just over the horizon. And what are they getting ready to do? What they have been doing for 7 years. They're going to come in, and they're going to plunder, and they're going to destroy, they're going to take, they are going to steal. Likely people are going to lose their lives, and it's going to be misery again. And as this goes on, we're told in verse 34 that the Spirit of the Lord enveloped Gideon. What exactly does that mean? I think that the best way to communicate it is this, is that Gideon, he is clean now before the Lord, and there's nothing in his heart and life that shouldn't be there, and he is an absolutely, completely useful tool in God's hand, and God's hand is strong on him, and we're told that Gideon does something. He blows the ram's horn, and the Abiezrites, that's his own clan, his own family, extended family, they gather behind him. And so, I don't know if any of you ever grew up near a volunteer fire department. I remember as a kid that we kind of lived near one, and periodically you'd hear that siren go off, and it was a call for all the firemen to show up and get on the truck. Anyway, this blowing of the ram's horn was a sign something is afoot. We need to gather together. And so that starts first with his family, and then messengers go throughout the entire tribe, and everybody comes together. Messengers are sent to these other tribes, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. They all come together to meet. And the fact that this is Gideon, he's never led anything. He's never been the line leader at school. And God's getting ready to use him to get rid of all these people who are just banked over the horizon, that are ready, that are armed, that are equipped, and frankly, far more numerous than they would ever want, far better equipped than the Israelites are. In fact, based on chapter 8, we read that it looks like their number was somewhere around 135,000. 135,000. Based on 2021 census numbers, the city of High Point numbered 117,000. So take everybody in the city of High Point and then fill up the Greensboro Coliseum, and that's how many people are gathered. And Gideon has gotten now all the people, he's blown the horn, and now everybody's gathered, and they're like, okay, now what? Now, Gideon candidly should have been taking note. He should have been encouraged by the fact that he's already just taken these small steps, and people are responding. This is evidence of the fact that God is at work. This is evidence of the fact that God is in this. But what does he do at this point? Well, what he does at this point is to do what most of us know Gideon for. In fact, the thing that probably stands out in your mind is what we just read about this whole experience of a fleece and taking this piece of wool and putting it out and asking God to make it wet, asking God to make it dry. Now, very easily we could almost kick a guy while he's down and say, Gideon, what is the matter with you? I mean, God has been demonstrating over and over and over and over again that he's in this. Even the fact that all these people have gathered when you summoned them, the fact that they're all here and they're all seemingly willing to follow your leadership, that ought to be a clear sign that God is up to something big and that what he's tasked you with, that he's empowering you to accomplish. In truth, that's probably where he should have been, but he wasn't. And we could say, Gideon, what's the matter with you? Why in the world would you feel this way? But we need to pay attention to the fact that Gideon, he was just a young guy, just a person, like me, like you. We're people who get nervous. We're people who get anxious. We are people that like reassurance. We are people that are scared of taking the first step. We are afraid of making the first move. What I want you, though, to understand is that how Gideon was feeling in the moment, his fear, his anxiety, his trepidation, all that was real, but in the scheme of things, that did not matter compared to his obedience. So, well, what are you trying to say? Let me illustrate it this way. In our house, we've got most, like school days, they start everybody up by 6:30. And we've got 17, a 16, a 14, 11-year-old, 7-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And so it's like prison roll call, trying to get everybody up in the morning. And so of all those ages of kids that I just listed, we have one that is difficult to get up in the morning. And you may have your guess as to which one it is, but I'm telling you, it's our 7-year-old. And I love Peter to death, but Peter, I'd rather wake a bear up in the morning than to wake Peter up. Because Peter is not happy to be waking up in the morning, especially to wake up and go to school. And so regularly we have this conversation. All right, Peter, it's time to get up. It's time to go to school. I don't want to go to school. School's boring. And what do I say? I don't care if it's boring or not. You're going to school. What am I saying to him? That how he feels about that matters less than him actually doing this. Listen, as God gives you a task, as He puts something on your heart, as He invites you to something that scares you to death, very easily those feelings, that anxiety, that trepidation, that fear can be paralyzing, where you think, well, until I feel strong about this, until I can square my shoulders back and raise my chin up high, I'm just not going to take the first step. Listen, that can be a trap. That can be a trap where you don't actually make a move. Gideon is going to move, thankfully, in spite of fear, in spite of anxiety, in spite of all sorts of uncertainty. And that matters. Why? Because your obedience to what God calls you to matters more than how you feel about it. And if you're waiting until your feelings are in the right place, that day may never come. What God is interested in from me, from you as His follower, is actually following Him. You remember we see with the confrontation of Saul back in 1 Samuel 15, that to obey is better than to sacrifice. God is interested in my obedience. And as you weigh, whether now or in the future, God puts something on your heart, there's something that He wants you to be about, you can say, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't do that because I'm so scared, and maybe God wants me to wait until I feel fortified to act. No, I'm telling you, your obedience matters more than your feelings. The other thing that we see based on what we read here that should be an encouragement is this: God isn't too big to help little you. God isn't too big to help little you. At this point, we come to what is so familiar to us about the life of Gideon. And he says in verse 36, God, if you're going to deliver Israel by my hand, so if you're really in this task of using me, I'm going to do something. And I'm going to put a wool fleece here on the threshing floor. And he says, when I come in here in the morning, if the dew is on the fleece, so if the fleece is wet and the ground is dry, I'm going to know that you're going to deliver Israel by my strength. Gideon gets up the next morning, and what happens? He squeezes the fleece, and the dew that wrung out of it was sufficient that it filled a bowl with water. And the ground around it, you could kick dust up with it. But look at verse 39. He says, and you can almost imagine the gesture that goes with it, where he's like, okay, God, now don't be angry with me. Don't be angry. Let me ask one more thing. Please allow me to make one more test with this fleece. Let it remain dry and dew be all over the ground. So the next morning, what I'm asking, dry fleece, wet ground. And he comes out the next morning, and what does he find? Sopping wet ground and completely dry fleece. All right, so what do we do with this? Do we use this as an example to say, you know what, I need to go to Hobby Lobby to, well, you can't go today. Are they closed? No. Yeah, you can't go today. Go to Michael's because they're pagans. Anyway, I need to go to the craft store and see if I can find some sort of furry fabric that I can start laying a fleece out of some sort. And so whether I'm supposed to do X, Y, or Z tomorrow, that I'm going to start playing this game of testing God. Or maybe it is I'm going to come up with something else really bizarre. So God, if you really are in this, will you cause my alarm clock to go off at 8:17 tonight without me setting it? For me to get up in the morning and my favorite shoes, for my left shoe to be really tight. For me to get up in the morning and it's still, because time hasn't changed yet, it's still dark in the morning, and will you cause my right headlight to be out? And if all that happens, then I'll know that you are in this, that you want me to do X, Y, or Z, and then I'll follow you. Should we take what Gideon does here and apply that to our lives and say, well, that's what I need to do. I need to dream up something crazy for God to do, something really bizarre because, well, absent that, I'm just not going to do what he says. Listen, this is what Gideon did, and I don't think, candidly, we should celebrate it. And certainly it is not the case. I think we should say that this is how I need to operate. This is how you need to operate. But I do think we need to pay attention to this. It is what Gideon did, and God did it. There is something very significant in this that I think we ought to pay attention to, and I think it has a lot to do with words that we use where sometimes the meaning that they have in our mind may be different from how the word at least started, or over time it kind of picks up some different meaning, or sometimes we're just not familiar with what the term means. And for example, I used to go to church with a guy, and he used to love to just mess with kids that were like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years old. And he'd see them at church on Sunday morning and say, hey, I bet you slumbered in the bed last night. And they're like, I didn't slumber in the bed last night. Because they didn't know what it meant, right? They assumed he was talking about something completely different. And so in their mind, this word means something that it actually didn't. Let me give you a word that, for many of us, means something that is actually different than how it was originally intended. And it's this word, condescend. Condescend. Most of the time when we use the word, we are speaking about it negatively. That the clerk at some store spoke to me in a condescending fashion. That my supervisor or that the police officer or the teacher, someone spoke to me in a condescending tone. But that word didn't always convey that meaning. It comes to us from Latin, where con means to gather and descend meaning down. And it means literally to come down to. And as the word came into our language, it conveyed the idea of lowering one's self to that of another. Intentionally. And this was never to be a negative thought, it was entirely a positive thought. But in truth, this is what happens, we read about in John chapter 1, where it says of Jesus that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That God in Christ condescended, that He came down to our level. I want you to understand that God never for a moment forgets who and what He's dealing with. You know, as the psalmist says in Psalm 103, verse 14, He knows what we are made of, remembering that we are dust. God never loses sight of my limitation. God never loses sight of my weakness. God never loses sight of my frailty. He is always aware of that. And God, understanding that, regularly what we will find Him do is to condescend, to come down to our level, because He's not too big to help little you. Again, I'm not suggesting that we need to do exactly what Gideon did and get out some fleece, some sort of fabric, and this is how we need to operate. But I am saying this, that God knows you. He knows your uncertainty. He knows your limitation. But He also knows if you're serious about your willingness to follow Him. And that if he can provide some sort of aid, if he can come alongside you in some way to encourage you to make that first step, that you're going to take it. In many ways, it's what we read about in Mark chapter 8, where the father of this young boy comes to Jesus and he says to Jesus, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." And Jesus helped him. What am I saying to you? I'm saying this. If you're someone that has a personal relationship with God, if you're a follower of Christ, there are things that he's going to lay on your heart that may induce fear, anxiety, trepidation. There's going to be things that are going to lead you out of your comfort zone, that could cost you time, effort, energy, money, security, all kinds of stuff. And if and when these moments come, that first step, because that's the toughest one. And you know that if the first one comes, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, that they will come easier. But making that first one is tough. I want you to understand that God is interested more in your obedience than how you feel about it. Just take it. But knowing that he's not too big to help little old you, to help little old me, and that he condescends, that he comes down to our level knowing our weakness. And if he can help me in my weakness, do you know what that says I can do? I can make that first move. Will you bow your heads with me?